All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's episode of the Perspectives webinar series. We're going to give people a few minutes just to join us. We're just now at the top of the hour. And while we're waiting, I was going to point out today is National Calligraphy Day. So, my question for you, I want you to tell us where you're dialing in from, but also how would other people describe your handwriting? Would they say it's something like chicken scratch, museum quality, somewhere in between? I don't know. What do you think, panelists? How's your handwriting? We didn't ask.
Like a 5-year-old
Like
for
a 5-year-old.
sure.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Same. I
Same.
I've heard it's like doctor's handwriting, where
Oh, yeah,
you
that's
can't
not good.
quite make out letter to letter.
See, Omaha in here says like a teacher. That's good, right? Calligraphy. Candace says calligraphy. Like that too. Teacher handwriting. Teacher's a popular answer right now in this chat. See, we have a very studious group. I love it.
They
I have
don't
terrible
teach our
handwriting
they don't
also.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
no, I was gonna say I don't think they teach
Teach
cursive in
cursive anymore.
school
Yeah,
anymore.
that's
And I
right.
was like, you have no idea what it was like in the 80s and 90s growing up.
Exactly right. I got our audience is doing better than us as panelists because mine's pretty terrible too. I see a little bit of not very legible, but a lot of really good stuff. School teacher handwriting. Maybe there's something about our audience. That's the people who are on time. The people who are running late, they're gonna have chicken scratch, I bet. We're gonna give just one more minute for people to join. I know people come from meeting to meeting, so if you just tell us where you're dialing in from and how would you rate your handwriting here on National Calligraphy Day? I always love national days. Sometimes I can't read my own handwriting, says Haley. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, you look back and you're like, what in the? When even AI is like, I got nothing. I don't know what that is. You know you're in trouble. Very good. All right. Well, we are at 2:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us again for our monthly Perspectives webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking all about, you can see on the screen, the infinite workday, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. My name is Dr. Matt Pepsel. I'm your host for today, as always, and I'm joined by Jan Bruce. Jan is a disruptor, entrepreneur, and force for growth, recognizing the science of resilience as the new essential for human and organizational capability. She co-founded Mequilibrium, otherwise known as MeQ, the #1 digital platform to deliver resilience at scale to workforces globally. Jan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Matt, it's my pleasure.
And next up, we have Lissy Alden. Lissy is the CEO and founder of Mindy, which is a pioneering organizational and mental fitness company built to beat employee burnout and promote peak performance. Lissy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
And last but not least, we have Melissa Doman. Melissa is an organizational psychologist, former clinical mental health therapist, author of Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work, as well as the forthcoming Cornered Office, Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health. And she's also the founder of the Workplace Mental Health Method. Mel, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, Matt, always good to see you.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to dive right in. I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping today. We're going to be recording the webinar and it'll be emailed to you. So if our panelists say something brilliant, like I'm sure they will, you're going to want to play that back. You can do that. And toward the end of the show, we're going to have our audience Q&A. So about 10 minutes or so, if I keep us to time, where you'll get to ask your questions to our panelists. Now, when you do that, be sure to use the Q&A button that's inside of Zoom. That way we'll be sure to see your question. The chat can get fast and furious sometimes, so we might lose it. So use that Q&A button in Zoom if you will. And you're going to want to stick around to the end because we've got some bonus resources for you. Some of our panelists have some things they'd like to share with you, and you can get their contact information. We'll give you a preview of next month's webinar as well. So with that, I wanted to set the frame for us today. There was a recent Microsoft report that came out and it talked, and I don't know if it coined it, but certainly popularized the term, the infinite workday. And as you know, Microsoft has communication technology, so they did a study analyzing communication patterns through Microsoft Teams and email and things like this. And you can see these headlines, the day starts before you do, right? So how many times do you work in anybody who's got global audience, for example, or maybe you've got some night owls who work or your colleagues and you join and you're like, how do I already have 20 emails? I just started my day, right? So you can see 40% of people online at 6 a.m. are reviewing email from, that have already come in. By the time midday comes, focus time, that's a mirage, right? You're back-to-back meetings. People are sometimes working through lunch. And then in the evening, you can see what they call this triple peak. It hasn't even peaked yet. So there's this flurry of activity before work starts, after work should have ended probably, and a little bit over lunchtime too. And this can create some real challenges. And so this infinite workday is probably as exhausting as it sounds, I think. So I wanted to recruit an expert panel coming from different vantage points, which is why we call the show Perspectives, and just kind of take a look at this topic from top to bottom. But at this point, I'd like to go ahead and move on to the next bit where we are going to hear from you, our audience. So we've got a Menti poll like we often do here, and you can either use your magic phone and point it at that QR code on the screen. Otherwise, you can turn to chat, and there's a handy URL you can click, or you can go to menti.com and enter those digits. Either way, you will get to our poll. And we've just got two quick questions for you today. The first one, how long is the average workday at your company? Is it a little light? Like people should be working perhaps a little bit more than they do. Is it right and tight? You got it all figured out. It's like, yep, people start when they should, they end when they should, nice and healthy. Never ending. That's that concept of the infinite workday, sure. And it varies by job role, which can create its own problems, I find too. But it varies by job role. Seems to be a popular answer. What do you think, panelists? Any reaction to our poll here? Any surprises?
Not at all.
No, not surprised.
No, don't even get me started on how quickly my husband grabs this device the minute his eyes open and our day starts. And I look and I go, stop it.
Right? Yep. I'm glad to see 28, 29 at this point, right and tight. That's good. Good, healthy boundaries. Nobody's a little light. One person, well, we're a little light. We probably could be leaning in a little harder, I guess. Never ending. That's pretty rough, and varies by job role. Doesn't necessarily mean like you would expect it to vary, but I'm sure some of those people are like, hey, wait a second, how come we're still working and they've already gone home? I've seen that happen in organizations too. That could be a little bit challenging.
Can I just add
please.
that I have heard it also really varies by industry.
Yeah.
I recently saw some data that just blew my mind about in the healthcare industry, healthcare, it's not an industry, doctors and nurse practitioners, primary care and other, and certain specialties that are, sort of face the patient. The amount of email that these, systems like Epic have fostered for our primary care physicians and our nurse practitioners adds essentially an additional day of work.
Wow.
To their, scheduled appointments. So,
Yeah.
I'm talking like 2,200 emails per day, things
Yeah.
like that. And it is just staggering. And there are probably other industries as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jan. And, it's bad enough when you get in all these emails from actual people. Now we're seeing that all the systems and the AI and everything, we're just
I'm
drowning
talking
in it.
about patients. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to our next poll question. We just got one more for you here. What contributes to a worker feeling I'm always on the clock where you work? For those workers who do feel like they just can't catch a break, they just seem like they're on way too long. From our audience perspective, what are you seeing out there that might explain what contributes to that worker feeling that way? So we see that the boss does the same thing. I guess that's the expectation. I don't want to look like I'm disloyal. How about being contacted outside of work hours? You got that coworker who sends that 9 o'clock email. Hey, I was just online doing some stuff. You're like, why are you bothering me? Global company. Yep. That just has a natural sort of cycle to it. A lot of leadership expectations. Yep. Never ending emails. Boy, there it is with the emails. Nailed it. Other leaders messaging you directly. Lack of boundaries. A boss who hovers. Ooh, hovering bosses. Uh-oh. Salaried means you work 24/7. How about that?
I'd love
I
to
see.
add to this also
Yeah.
that even though it is very helpful, super communicative, and timely, that when you have platforms like Slack,
Mm-hmm.
for example, depending on the settings that you have and what's expected, those are not always
Yeah.
congruent. There can be that always on mentality where people getting pinged at all hours of the night, depending on what those communication tools are set up.
I saw one too. It said always wanting to be helpful. And I think that goes back to boundaries. And Jan is our CEO on the call. I saw a CEO sending emails at 9 o'clock. That was not happy to see that. A lot of emails at all hours and coverage plans too. Yeah, staffing. Sometimes I know if we cut staff and we're all excited about AI improvements in productivity, so let's cut some staff. And then all of a sudden staff's completely underwhelmed. Like, what were you thinking? and a lot of work apps on the phone. That's back to your technology, Melissa. This is awesome. Thank you so much to our audience for helping us kind of get we like to understand where you're coming from as we go through and jump into the panel part of the show. But I'll get us started with this. Let's define the challenge. Let's talk specifically about what you're seeing as sort of when you think about the primary, either the mental health and fitness, when it comes to sort of the mental challenges that can come from being always on in this concept of the infinite workday. Mel, I wonder if you might get us started with this one. Like, where are employees, like, what's happening when they're always checking in like that? What are they experiencing?
I think the question might even be, what are they not experiencing these days? Because it is such a broad range. And so, Matt, you and I go way back, and the way that I tend to look at this stuff is when we look at these systems in which we work, I try to start down at the biology of it all. So we are organisms within this system of work, and our brains are running on very outdated, we'll say cave person software, as opposed to the hardware of the skills that we're all learning now, expected to learn, heightened expectations and lower patience to do so. And so if we're looking at the mental health impact of the infinite workday, I mean, I would say the impact itself is kind of infinite if it goes unmanaged. So we're looking at degraded mental health. We're looking at increases of occurrences of mental health conditions. We're looking at heightened levels of chronic stress. We're looking at the mind-body connection and how that can kick off a whole festival of and cocktail of hormones and neurotransmitters that are supposed to occur sometimes as opposed to all the time. So I look at those as kind of those snap moments that are left on repeat that have a demonstrable effect. Like, for example, when mental health is not doing great and you have high rates of adrenaline and cortisol from having to work all the time, that doesn't go without consequence. And so not only is it impacting mental health, cognition, physical health, how you interact socially, how you behave professionally. So I'm not trying to be gloom and doom, but really looking at how there is a systemic level of impact that we're just so busy going like this and going boom, 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 that before you know it, your nervous system shuts you down and you completely burn out. And it goes, well, this is why we can't have nice things, because I gave you all these warning signals and you ignored it.
Right.
So
Yes.
I'm gonna pause because then I'm gonna go off on a tangent, but that's the general thing that I've been seeing.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty comprehensive and holistic. But let's see, I'll ask you the same question. Let's see, you're a mental fitness expert. Like, when you're thinking about this concept and this research about this infinite workday, people can't seem to get off. Like, what is the impact? What do we see as a result?
Yeah, so when I think about mental fitness as we define it, it's really about building the right mindset to achieve your goals. And when we think about the infinite workday, in many ways, what's happened is with our always on culture, but due to the global nature of so many of our workplaces, and also technology, which obviously comes at us from every angle, not just our phones, but 12 different devices on our computers. What I'm finding is that people are having harder time finding space to create new mental patterns or new behavioral patterns. And they're essentially like mentally suffocating, right? And so what happens is we are on the receiving end of a lot of these, or on the defense with a lot of these different technologies and communications, and as a result have very little time to exercise a new mindset or to shift our perspective, or what we like to call recover. And so what's happening is that while a lot of mental health tools are now available to people in the workplace, we don't have a minute to use them because, again, we're still at the reaction of a lot of the way that honestly the nature of work has shifted over time.
Yeah, it really has. Doggone, Lissy, mental, uh, that sort of confounded, that being stuck like that, it doesn't sound good at all. It's
No,
terrible.
no, it's not. It's why I always like to say that the practice of mental fitness is just like doing squats. It feels uncomfortable to start to set those boundaries, to say no, to actually get to a place where you're, stepping away from your computer or the workday. It is hard.
Yeah.
And I always say it's psychologically hard, maybe not as physically hard as a squat, but it's why it's a practice and why it's important for us to be talking about it in the context of the infinite workday.
Yeah. And Jan, same question for you. When you're thinking about this notion of being always on, what do you see as the ill effects?
Well, first of all, I think for a lot of people that are always on, to build on what Lizzie said, they would rather be on than do squats.
Yeah.
True.
Right. But the
No.
reality is you might rather do the squats. I think that if you take this to the highest level of impact, for our businesses, beyond our people, beyond the physical, which you've covered. So to build on that, I think that this contributes to, left unattended, this contributes to like what I would call employee disconnect, because there's got to be a tipping point, and that disconnect is like a syndrome that involves burnout and high stress, and not even like seeing those things, which is kind of what what Missy was talking about, Melissa, sorry,
You can
talking
call me
about.
Missy. That's cool. My
Okay.
parents always hoped that name would catch, and it never did. So I'll tell
Oh,
them it
that's
did
great.
today.
I'm so sorry. I just thought of, okay.
No, I will take Missy. That's fine. 100%.
Excellent.
Missy and
But
Lissy. That'd be good.
yeah, exactly. But that there's this syndrome of burnout and high stress and mental duress, which over time starts to erode trust in the business, in the leadership, in like the what am I doing? And what we're starting to see from this infinite workday, the effects of that is that like a majority of workforce is starting to show at least one of these symptoms, with the younger employees, and we'll get into that later, are particularly affected by this, probably because they are more inclined to, play into that infinite workday syndrome. So, these are, that's my take on it. It basically, erodes that trust, and kind of in a way a breach of contract, like a psychological contract, that this is the work time, this is when we do our work, like we're going against that in some subconscious level. There's a breach there.
Yeah. And Jen, I want to keep you in the spotlight for a second. So when you think about it, a lot of us choose to stay on that hamster wheel. We don't want to do the squats that Lizzie's telling us about. We want to just stay addicted almost to this kind of this pace. What is it in our makeup sometimes for those of us who just can't quite seem to pull ourselves away and do the healthy thing?
Yeah, well, let me start with that, Matt, because I tend to, we like to call these people at MEQ the change masters. And, they are highly resilient and agile people. And what's happening is that this sense of, you know, you know, buying into this plays to their sense of purpose in the mission. And that's a really good thing for a while. That's a protective, blanket, there's a protective factor in that up to a point. Those people thrive in that high demand environment, and they are, they are able to withstand that. But over time, that's going to catch up with them, because we are human and we have to recharge at certain points, right?
Definitely a finite resource. Lissy, from your perspective too, what do you think of the same thing? Like psychologically speaking, like why do we keep ourselves doing this over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things, at least that we talk about at Mindy. I mean, the first is really related to what Melissa or my girl Missy was saying earlier, which is really about this idea that from a, basic perspective, our brains are pattern makers and repeaters. And we are often at the whim of those patterns, because when we are tired, exhausted, or overwhelmed, I always like to say your brain takes up 2% of your body weight and between 20 and 30% of the energy you burn every day. So when you are tired, your brain just doesn't work that well. So trying to break a new pattern when you're in one of these cycles of exhaustion and stress or infinite work days is just a physiologically difficult thing to do. So that's the first thing, is that, I think it's just very compelling, because it is biologically easier to go on the path more well trod, which tends to be to say yes, to keep going. The second thing is, it goes to what Jan was saying, which is that I think, there's a lot of talk about workers today not loving work or that they don't want to work. I actually don't believe that. Whether you're talking about, Gen Z, millennial, or Gen X, boomers, everyone really is looking for a sense of purpose at the end of the day. And I think a lot of people are able to find that. But when you find that purpose or find that thing that you're useful at work, it feels really good to say yes because you get a lot of pats on the back. But my mom always used to say, too much chocolate cake is too much chocolate cake. And so it might be good, it might feel good, it might feel okay to say, all right, I'm going to step out for dinner. Sorry, family, I've got this one thing to do. But that feeling of feeling vital can be really, really, really challenging. So, go ahead, Melissa.
No, I'd love to add
Yeah.
to what my twinsy is saying. I literally cannot wait to tell my parents. I think it took 40 years, but the name finally caught.
Yeah.
There we go.
So
Today was the day.
I digress. So I think that adding to what both Jan and Lissy are saying is I think also for some people, I like to go back to the threat and reward model. So there are a lot of, we naturally, all organisms go away from threat and towards reward. And sometimes running away from threat is enough of a reward. So there are some people that will find it compelling to be always on because they want to avoid a potential consequence. Now, are those consequences manufactured? Are they visible? Are there people within the organization that make them try to avoid being criticized by always being on? Because if they're not, are they going to be criticized? Are they going to be fired? Are they going to be shamed? Those sorts of things. So that motivation enough to go away from that very real threat is why some people do it. Now, there are other people who tie always being on and being that grind within the organization as their form of success. They want to be needed. Maybe they are a people pleaser, or for those of you on this call, similar to me, people pleaser in recovery, and it is really difficult to stay there. Or it's really tied to their identity. The more available I am, the more capable I'm seen to be. The more available I am, the more likely I am to be promoted. People make all of these decisions constantly going away from threat and towards reward, which result, like Lissy was saying, in these really tough patterns that are hard to break because it takes a long time to become that person and can take even longer to change those behaviors, especially when you take it all the way back down again to going towards reward and away from threat. And there's a huge spectrum about why people do that.
Now, Mel, one of the things that you've taught us how to have mental health conversations at work, which some
I've
people aren't
certainly
comfortable
tried.
doing. You're doing your best. And I think that at the same time, some people have pretty low self-awareness when it comes to this. They may not realize that they're
Oh,
being hooked
yeah.
by this. So
Oh,
my,
yeah.
my question to you, let's set the record straight here. So when you think about the difference, like how do we distinguish between what are healthy behaviors and healthy
Mm.
engagement with work versus crossing over in that problematic zone?
I love that question. I think that I often encourage people to find, because you and I in the past have talked about the Yerkes-Dodson law, so the
Mm.
stress curve. Now, it is not often that in our formative years or any time in our career that someone influential sits down with us and they're like, you need to learn how to find your tipping point. And you need to learn how to find what that looks like emotionally, cognitively, physically, socially, professionally when you're being pushed far beyond that one standard deviation past your tipping point. Do any of the over 600 people on this call ever recall having that conversation presented to them? No, because in a lot of cases, people, like, who tells you to do that unless you reach this point of burnout, breakdown, illness, disease, where you're like, ooh, I need to reevaluate my priorities. So, what I normally encourage people to do is to have a very honest and sometimes uncomfortable conversation with themselves about what their patterns actually look like, not how we negotiate our perception of them to be, because those are ne'er often the same. Uh, and I find that when you're really honest about what those patterns are and how they make you feel demonstrably with logically observable data, then you have to have the conversation of, is this actually healthy? Because look at all these things it's doing to me. Look at what it's doing maybe to the people I love. look at what it's doing to, how I interact with others in my life. And so I think that to make that sort of decision of what is healthy versus unhealthy, you got to sit down and record the data because it's all available if your eyes are open to it and you're willing to collate it and action it. Because that's
Right.
not a comfortable thing to do, because staying in patterns, like Lissy is saying, is so much easier than forging new neural pathways, because you can't undo the stuff that's already there. You can only build new things, like going on a new hiking trail. The less you use the old one, it grows over, the more you build the new path and you keep using it, the more patterned it will become.
I think it's a great point. And Jen, I wanted to get your perspective on the same distinguishing question. It can be hard sometimes to tell between healthy behaviors versus problematic behaviors. What's your take on how we can start to notice the difference?
Well, I think it is. I mean, it's an interesting question that you're asking me because I actually think that it's often very hard to distinguish,
Mm,
and that is the problem. This is an insidious problem. And we have some data that actually, it's interesting. We do kind of a global, we call it, we do a global like pulse check across all of our customers twice a year so that we watch what's going on over time and you can see, how opinions about things change. And how stress levels and burnout level change. But one of the things that's really interesting right now is that when we ask people about their own stress levels and the stress levels of their colleagues right now, they basically, 45% of them say that they are stressed, but 65% of them say that their colleagues are stressed.
right.
So you can't, sometimes people, to Mel's point, it's hard to get people to actually do that self-check.
Right. Because then you kind of have to take accountability for it, but you're like, no, I'm good. Everybody else around me, they're really, they're stretched
Right.
thin.
But then the
So
question becomes, oh, really? How's it working out for you?
Well,
how's it working
100%.
for you?
Yeah.
Right,
I'm a
exactly.
butthead about it, and I go, tell me more about that.
Yeah. I think people don't feel safe necessarily, even in their own minds, about admitting that, I
Yeah,
have to step off this hamster wheel every
what
once in a
that
while.
means.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but Lucy, I
definitely.
want to move us forward with this one, which is that we got great HR professionals on the call. They're responsible for what's happening inside the organization. I want to talk about warning signs
Mm.
because it's one thing for Microsoft to come out with a report, but in organizations where we work, how do we know whether this kind of culture of being always on is taking hold? We may not be monitoring everybody. We certainly don't monitor everybody, but how do what can we look to understand if this is really a problem that we need to be focused on as HR professionals?
Yeah. So there's kind of two things I think a lot about, which is like what's happening at the micro level or the employee level, and what's happening at the macro level, which is the organizational level. So when I think about the employee level, I talk a lot about like what's your VAT tax, VAT. So anyone who's traveled, you can get this tax back after you buy something, right? It's a really nice treat. But most of us understand the idea that there's a tax, right, involved in everything that we do. The invisible tax of the infinite workday is what I call the VAT tax, which is about values, agency, and time. And when you're starting to notice that people are coming to you talking about work taking too big of a tax on their values or how they choose to live their life, their agency, their sense of control, you're hearing things like, I can't, I wish I could, like try to push back, or time, meaning like, I don't have time to spend with my family. That tends to be a warning sign that something's going on within the company, and it could be at the individual level. But then the other places to look tend to be in these aggregated, both qualitative and quantitative metrics. I always say engagement surveys, whether you do them once a year, twice a year, you're doing pulse surveys, they are an incredible way to get a sense of how things are going. The challenge is a lot of times we look at these averages by organization when you really should be looking by team. So looking at the engagement survey data and cutting that by smaller groups that actually, you know, cohesively go together will help you find those themes. In addition to now with ChatGPT, you can do it. I used to do this by hand. You do these like word clouds to understand what are your themes coming out of your qualitative results. To understand again, is there some sort of challenge against, again, people's values, their agency, and their time?
I think that really lines up well with the poll results too, where it was like, oh, it varies by job. So it's another argument for doing what you said, which is like cut the survey results by team. Let's create a like a heat map that we can understand where we have some rough spots. But Jana, I want to get the same question from you. Mequilibrium, MEQ covers so many. You got millions of employees working with you in more than 84 countries, I think I saw. So what are some of the warning signs that we should be looking for to see if this infinite workday is kind of getting the best of our teams?
Well, I think that you're right. Predictive risk data, having a consistent, you want this to be de-identified and aggregated and segmentable by, to Lissy's point, by team, by lines of business, by region of the world. Increasingly, HR professionals are like data geeks too, right? That, and it's an important skill set, but to have that view of what's going on with regard to burnout, even mental health risks for depression, anxiety, but also engagement, and pessimism. Like how there are measures of pessimism and coping, adaptive capacity. How well are we coping? And watching that data can give HR an advanced view, because like healthcare issues. Prevention and early intervention is really important. Beyond that, I think that you want to you want to acclimate leadership to understand these warning signs. Sometimes, beyond the data, you see this in terms of people are tired, people are cranky, there's growing incivility, there's deteriorating psychological safety. People are become like not just necessarily afraid, but they turn off saying what they think because they don't want to engage in risk-taking behavior. And so all of those things, those are more of the subjective views, that you can add to the data.
Yeah, I'm really hearing. Yeah, let's complement that with both. Let's use the data that we have, but also let's just keep our eyes open and look for the subjective as well. But Mel, I want to move us forward to solutioning some of this. So let's say I'm an HR professional. I've got some data. I've got some concerns, and I
Yeah.
want to talk to employees. Like, what can I recommend specifically to employees to help them manage their own mental wellness and as best I can? Like, what's in bounds for me? Like, what's overstepping? How do I approach this?
Well, I think that I want to cover two areas. I think there's one thing to cover from an individual perspective. And I really like what Lissy was saying about looking at data based on teams as opposed to the aggregate of the organization. And Matt, how you're talking about a heat map. I think those are really helpful, concrete things that people can look at. And so I want to look at one for individual and one for teams. So let's start with the teams. Now, I would say actually now it depends if people are going to adhere to this.
Always, yeah.
So the hope is that they will, and that's why I recommend it by team as opposed to the whole organization. Now, I understand that the phrase I'm about to say is going to bring up a lot of big feelings for people, and that's okay. I think that when it comes to an always on culture, that a lot of the organizations that are struggling and continuing that are allowing a lot of manufactured emergencies. Now, what I mean by that is en encouraging teams to implement a five-alarm fire system is not something you see very often. And I think that's a huge mistake because informing organizations of what can and will happen if they don't do that through
Mhm.
data, through demonstrably understood data, is a huge miss. Now, this doesn't mean you can't have like a hustle culture. It doesn't mean you can't work hard. It doesn't mean you can't get things done. It does not mean that you need to have a culture of manufactured emergencies that are screwing people's mental health on a daily basis. Now, Having a 5 alarm fire system, I usually recommend, goes team by team, while understanding that teams may have different systems and that can create its own issue, but we cannot boil the ocean, so let's start small.
Mm.
So I think that means collectively defining what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 alarm fires look like, the type of responses that that merits, and really having people agree to it, understanding that there are exceptions. So that is something very tangible that you can encourage team by team. If you can roll it out organization wide, A plus, but trying to start low and reasonable,
Mm.
because the perception of urgency varies person to person. That just happened with someone I know yesterday where there was an emergency meeting at 5 o'clock, which everybody then saw, oh, this 100% could have waited a couple of days. And it
Mm.
made everybody panic and they're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then it was nothing. So you have that. The other thing I'd recommend for on an individual level is two things. One thing I actually was inspired from by Brene Brown, and when I saw her speak at South by Southwest this year, I was like, I'm not worthy, you're amazing, because she is amazing. She talks about this capacity communication tool that she uses with her husband. Good news is you don't need to have a romantic relationship to use this. You can use this definitely at work and even outside of work, where they talk about the 0 to 100 scale. 100 is I'm operating on all cylinders, 0 is I'm comatose, don't even look at me. So each person, I think, has an opportunity and responsibility to define what that scale looks like, the different intervals, and at each of those intervals saying, this is how I feel, this is what I'm capable of, this is what I'm not capable of, this is why it's okay, and how I'm going to tell other people. Now, you can do that whether you are in a calm state, oh, this is how I think I'll feel at these different areas, or when you're panicking in the moment, I'm at 30% right now. This is what it looks like, what I can do, what I can't do, how I'm going to tell other people. If more people communicated capacity to each other, doesn't mean they're going to accept it. Big caveat. It can open up a big opportunity for realizing when people are pushing each other beyond reasonable limits in moments when it is not appropriate. But it also increases the individual responsibility to let other people know where you are, because no offense to anybody who believes in psychics, people are generally not mind readers.
Mm.
Although
Right.
that's different than being a psychic. So I clearly don't know a lot about the topic. Um, so I highly recommend encouraging people to come up with those capacity scales and how they communicate that to other people. Again, understanding it doesn't always get accepted. The other thing I would recommend is something of my own invention. I don't talk about it to stroke my ego. I talk about it because people tell me it works. I feel that managing mental health is just as important as sleeping, eating, bathing, and breathing. That is how I feel. The average person does not have just that one thing that they do consistently, barring death, dismemberment, hell, high water, or illness, and I'm not kidding, for their mental health. Because when it comes to the infinite workday and all these other things and caregiving responsibilities and doing all these other things, our mental health, first thing off the list. And so I don't care what that looks like for you. The wellness industry doesn't get to tell you what makes you feel good and your mental health feel good. I'm a former therapist. I don't do yoga to relax. Meditation doesn't work for me. In case you can't see this anxiety doll from Inside Out 2, anxiety is my love language. That stuff doesn't work for me. So my mental well-being non-negotiables are being in nature at least once a week. I live in Colorado, that's pretty easy. Playing with my dog every night, even when she doesn't want to, because she's basically a wild dingo and she's spicy, and doing salsa dancing. I've been doing it for 20 years. When I do salsa, my mind goes blank. So if you want to buy a unicorn costume off Amazon and dance to Metallica on Saturdays, do that. If you want to do reading for 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week, do that. You want to do coloring book with your kids on Sundays, do that. But find just one thing that you stick to, except those other cases I mentioned, when you're ill, there's an emergency, things like that, and do it like your life depends on it. I had 3 surgeries on my left leg, and it did not stop me from zooming around my apartment to salsa music and shaking because I was going to lose my damn mind if I didn't. Or during the pandemics, dancing's not a very socially
Yeah.
distancing friendly thing.
Well, I love that
So
you've got such great accountability that comes from that, saying
yeah,
you're responsible for your mental health. We get that, and I think
exactly.
Melissa you gave us such great opportunities when it comes to teams and individuals. But with the time we have remaining, Jan and Lissy, I want to get your take on. Let's turn our attention to the executives. At some point, we're going to come in and say we've seen a problem. We need to make either time or monetary investments in wellness, mental wellness specifically. Jan, I'll start with you. What's our best shot at making the business case for mental wellness with the executives?
Well, I think that first of all, there are huge, business benefits to investing in mental wellness. If that's what you're asking, Matt, what we see is the return. This is not like a feel-good thing for employees. This is not an entitlement. This, building proactive mental wellness, let's just call it that, building resilience and self-efficacy and teaching people not just of the importance of work-life balance, but sort of regularly practicing, recharging your batteries, so to speak, has an incontrovertible effect on uh, mental health costs, on productivity, but also unplanned absence, leave rates, companies are, leaves are, mental health leaves are skyrocketing, especially amongst, Gen Z and millennial workers. We also see attrition, and, even when there are leaves, shorter lengths of leaves, can be, so there are real costs if that's what you're asking about.
Yeah.
Matt.
Yeah. I think highlighting those consequences, is huge because in this job market, people aren't going to quit necessarily, but they will take leave because they can. And legally they will do that. And I think then it creates strain on everybody else and the business grinds down, customers get frustrated. But Lissy, I'll give you the closing comment on this one too. So best case, or I should say best pitch to the executives, what would you say to our listeners here about trying to make the case for mental fitness and mental wellness investments?
Yeah, I think there's two things I think about. One is the fact that when it comes to your mind, it sits behind your eyes and we all forget it's there. So your job as a leader is to make the mental wellness, the infinite workday as visible as possible to the leadership team so that they can understand and you can get on the same page about the actual challenge that you're facing. I always like to say we all agree that, work-life balance is not a thing, but if it's not balance, what is it? It's what I call a rhythm. So if you're teaching people how to find their rhythm, you have to have them sign up for classes. They have to learn. And so some form of investment of learning and that ongoing practice has to show up. And so whether that's in the form of training, consulting, peer groups, feedback loops, whatever it is, like there has to be a way where people are constantly honing in on this rhythm for themselves and their teams. And in order to do that, it requires an element of investment and using all the things Jan just mentioned, which is really we'll call them like the dark side effects of not doing them, these turnover
Right.
rates, what happens when you actually lose core team members, what happens when you actually have somebody who's disgruntled, what happens to their productivity, finding ways to actually codify that really, really matters. And so that's what I would say is make the invisible visible and then find metrics, even at a micro level, find a team of 10 people, have them track their hours for a given period of time. In a week where they're using one of these tools and a week where they're not, it's really, really meaningful, even these mini case studies.
I love it. Well, thank you, panelists. I think this is it's a heavy topic in the sense that we know people are struggling, suffering, some by choice, some by lack of awareness, some because they feel they have to. There's a lot of reasons, but I think there's positivity here. We're going to have some great resources from you at the end, and I think you've given us not just a clear picture, a clear-eyed view of understanding the warning signs, but also some of the solutions we can have at every level, whether it's making that business case, dealing with team managers, leaders, as well as for the individuals themselves. So I'm going to shift us toward the audience Q&A portion of the show. And what that means is that if you haven't had a chance to pose your question, you can pose it in the Q&A. And while we're waiting for those last questions to come in, we're going to throw a link into the chat as well. And that's a recognition that companies are using talent optimization to boost their business results through better people practices, I would say. And so if you've got some interest in learning about our sponsor of the show, the Predictive Index, or maybe you already have some exposure to PI, you want to learn more, whichever it is, just go ahead and answer using that chat. That would be fantastic. And I'm just going to move us on to the Q&A portion. Panelists, this is my favorite part because I have no idea what's about to happen. So here's the first one. What are some of the not so obvious feedback or themes from engagement surveys to watch for that might indicate employee burnout? And I'll just say, like, sometimes people aren't 100% comfortable being super honest. So if we kind of have to read through some of the comments, what are some of the things in engagement surveys that we should specifically look for that might indicate that? Who wants to be the first one to take that one?
Oh,
You go ahead. Let's go Jan, then Mel, then Lissy.
Yeah.
I'll be quick on that. I
Yeah.
kind of, one of the things that I think you want to look for is whether people feel supported by their managers. Because that is like what we find is that when people don't feel supported by their managers, that's kind of code for
Yeah, I
they're
gotcha.
not getting the air cover. So
I love that.
I'll just stop so we can all get our
That's good. And wait till you see how many questions we got. So go ahead, Mel. You're up next.
So I'm actually going to build on what Jan said. Also, I apologize for my last answer where I was blue streaking. I get very soapboxy, and I apologize. I probably took too
You
much
thought you were on
time.
my podcast. That's what it is.
I have big feelings. Building on what Jan said, I'm actually going to flip that on its head. So two things that I think to look out for is that in some, emphasis on some cases, when people are not supported by their managers, there are some managers that do that when they also feel they are not getting support from the organization. Leadership mental health is big on my mind right now, obviously with the book coming out. So that is also something to think about. Are leaders who are unsupported then not supporting their teams and engaging in unhealthy leadership behaviors? The second brief thing I'll mention is that there is some burnout and burnout behaviors that are driven by unspoken stories of workplace bullying. People are very afraid to talk about that because of potential retaliatory situations. So those are the two things I'll mention.
Let's see, what do you think if I'm trying to read through the comments?
3-letter word.
Yeah.
Pay. People talk about pay when they got nothing left, when they've already complained about their boss, when they've already talked about workload. You start to see a lot of comments about pay. And if all of you know this in HR, you take a quick look at basically what's happening within the metrics within their region, and they're generally getting paid the right amount. It's the general feeling, I'm not getting paid enough to work this hard or this long.
It's just not worth it. Yep. All right. So we're going to do a lightning round because I got so many of these coming up. How can HR integrate sustainable principles to redesign work practices that prevent burnout and support well-being? Basically, all the things we've been talking about, even when resources are limited or leadership feels their hands are tied by existing systems or expectations. So when we think about time is short, sometimes dollars are short, what are some of the things that how can HR specifically say, this doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of money, but we need to do something?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jan.
Well, I would say that, first of all, this is a place where digital can be your friend, and software, because, like, for example, with MeQ, we have, we've perfected a way to help train targeted groups of managers and acclimate them to these issues. The quote is, my managers are really good. My managers of my call centers or my compliance centers are really good at compliance or managing call centers, but they don't really understand burnout or how to, talk to people who are under distress. And we can, I'm not trying to turn these folks into therapists, but social norming the impact of these problems and how, best practices about how to deal with it is short money and short time, by the way, to helping people at least be more aware, and not sort of make the problem worse. Then, I also think that best practices, companies need to develop best practices that will help, and it usually, that will, hold the line, like, getting it back to the infinite workday. We need to hold our emails till 9 or 8, whatever the working hours are, the next morning, right? Because we are the leaders and people take their cues from us. So those are my 2 cents. I'm sure there's others.
I like it. Well, Lissy, I got one for you, and then I got one for Mel. Lissy, this one's for you. Can you explain that more in the sense of how does agency play out when it's taxed? So when we're feeling under pressure, how does agency take a hit?
Yeah. So when we're feeling under pressure, a lot of times the signs of agency or the sense of control getting taxed are again people saying things like, I wish I could, but I can't. I want to turn off, but my email, keeps coming in from my boss. It's kind of this sense of like loss of control. And what can tend to happen is again, because we're tired, exhausted, overwhelmed, we tend to be at the whim of yes, especially for all of us who tend to be, have that positive pattern of making other people happy or being high performers and wanting to get an A plus. And so what ends up happening is again, we lose our ability to do the hard thing, which is to say no, so that we can continue to show up over time.
Right.
And again, kind of get to this tough spot. But I always like to say there was a lot of talk in the chat about boundaries. I always like to say that boundaries are not fences, they're ropes. And so getting to a place where people feel like they can actually move this rope to surround and protect the things that matter to them while staying flexible is the number one most important thing they can do so that when workload ramps up, they can continue to say, I can fill my cup up into this point, but I'm sorry, I have to go be with my family. I have to go work out. I have to go take care of myself. So I think the big thing is, agency takes a hit when you're starting to hear this language that really loses this sense of self. And again, the result tends to be the inability to say no.
Yeah, you're looking for somebody to come save you, and it's not going to happen. It's got to come from within. Mel, I got one for you here. This one's going to resonate with a lot of people, I think.
Sure.
What happens when you come back from a week off thinking that was going to do the trick, and you realize you're actually just as bad off as you were before you left?
My mom calls that the vacation tax. I was like, that's so sad and accurate. So
So
the thing
relatable.
is, I know she's got those zingers sometimes.
Mm.
So the thing is that this is a tough one because that time off is wonderful and we can recharge and, refill the proverbial cup. Doesn't change the system that you're coming back into and doesn't change or excuse us from the need to have our tactics and strategies to manage ourselves when we do re-enter, like what Lizzie is talking about. So yes, we absolutely need to step away from the stimuli of work and have that recharge time. And I think something really small that organizations can start doing today, even if there are $0 available about, for helping with burnout. You know how a lot of organizations tend to celebrate, the little wins that people do within teams to help boost morale. I think that organizations who can implement a opposite of death by 1,000 cuts, but 1,000 little cumulative moments that people can take individual responsibility for to focus on caring for their mental health, to focus on the types of, boundaries and things that they can do, just little things every day, because it's not going to make it go away, but it will take the edge off.
Love it.
So I think that recharge is critical
Yeah.
and cumulative small management every single work day so you don't just pop and go into burnout in disrepair.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is that I often have that unrealistic expectation, like a day off or a weekend or
Won't
even a
change
vacation is going
anything.
to fix everything. But if I don't change
No,
those core habits that all the panels have been
exactly.
teaching me, then
Exactly.
I'm going to just walk right back
Yeah.
in the soup.
Yeah.
Do a walk in soup? Why would we walk in soup? Okay, let's go ahead
Maybe if
and
it's
bring up those
stew.
slides again if you can, Rachel. The voice from above. And what I want to share is that our panelists have had some great information today. You can get in touch with them as well. We're going to have their LinkedIn contacts and their websites in the follow-up materials and I believe in the chat as well. So you can get in touch with them. There it went. And we'd love to have you connect with us on LinkedIn and follow up if you have any questions that we haven't been able to address. And I'm also going to share some of the guest promotions. We've got some great resources for you. Jan's got some resources that you can get by visiting Mequilibrium's website. So go check out MEQ's website and download their summer 2025 State of the Workforce report. Some really great stats in there to help you build that business case. Lissy's got us unlocking the power of mental fitness by downloading Mindy's newest industry report. So again, you need this data to make your case sometimes because you work with these analytic-minded leaders. Get the data from Mindy, get the data from MEQ, and do that. And Mel's got her book, Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work, and Here's Why, and How to Do It Really Well. That one's been out for a little bit. It's fabulous. I love it. use it in my graduate course as well. But you can also pre-order her new book, Cornered Office, Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health. So that comes out in February of next year. She's also got a website link for you with Leadership Mental Health Training Program as well. So those resources are going to be in your follow-up email tomorrow. You're going to want to check that out. And me, myself, I'm promoting the fact that we had a Lead the People podcast episode where Mel came on. We talked all about mental health. It's something that I needed a ton of help with. I was very uncomfortable having conversations about mental health at work, not because I didn't think it was important. I just didn't know how to start. So she'll talk all on the podcast about how to do that. So we're going to keep moving on. We've got a tip sheet for you this month. Oh, sorry, we're doing the book giveaway. Jen Thompson, thanks for being on the show today. You're the winner of book giveaway. Love to follow up with you and get that out to you. And yep, there's Jen thinking, woohoo, love that. So thanks for being here for that. We'll go on to the next slide. And it's this notion that we've got a tip sheet for you, 10 tips to combat the infinite workday. So we've been talking about some really important concepts today. Now you've got something that's going to be right there in your inbox that you can use. We've arranged these from personal strategies all the way through team techniques and all the way to that culture, that organizational level as well. So I think you'll find that super practical. Share it with the other people on your HR team, share it with your business leaders, whoever it is that if you find it helpful, just hopefully it gives you some value there. One more slide we have, which is the next month, we're going to be talking about the September slump. So think about you come back from a nice summer where everything was kind of slowing down, hopefully for you a little bit. And then we're like, oh man, we still got to finish this year. So understanding and preparing for that seasonal shift that takes place. That'll be on September 17th, same time, 2 o'clock Eastern. Would love to have you join us for that one as well. So before I say goodbye to our panelists and thank them so much, just want to also put out a shout out for our sponsor, the Predictive Index, to the global network of PI consultants around the world. And biggest thanks of all to you, the audience. But I will say, Mel, Lissy, Jan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this really, really important subject. I know it's more tempting than ever to feel like we're always on, but you've told us about the consequences and what to look for. But most importantly, you've told us how we can actually address this problem. So I'm grateful to you for doing that. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome.
Thanks so
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Great to meet you guys.
You
All right,
too.
everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, team.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.